Assignment 2 Video Presentation. Is Goods and Services Tax a Good Tax? By Erica Nitu. Firstly, what is Goods and Services Tax? It is commonly known as GST. It was introduced in July 2000, the beginning of the 2000 to the 2001 financial year. GST is where businesses include a 10% consumption tax on a majority of goods and services sold in Australia. This replaces multiple other costs and levies involved in selling goods or services. The GST amount received from consumers will be paid to the Australian taxation offices by businesses, and to charge a GST amount on consumable transactions, suppliers must be registered and meet requirements. There are a number of different goods and services that do not include a GST tax on them. Some include under the GST-free status is health, education, water, sewage, drainage, international travel, and basic foods such as fruit and vegetables. Other goods and services that are GST-free under input tax are loans, residential rent, and sale of residential properties. What is considered a good tax? According to the Treasury of Australian Government, they believe that a good tax raises the revenue needed to finance government activities without imposing unnecessary costs on the economy. A good tax satisfies the following key principles: equity, efficiency, simplicity, certainty, and neutrality. Is GST a good tax? Well, let's look at the principles of good tax. Firstly, we have equity. This is where a tax must be distributed fairly across both horizontal and vertical tax brackets. Unfortunately, GST does not satisfy this criteria. The goods and services tax cost of supply is a set 10% of price included during transaction. This rate does not change for consumers in a different tax bracket, as it is same for all payers. Moving on to efficiency. This is where tax must contribute to the economy and provide the government with funds, and it must not be discriminatory in nature, where a taxpayer cannot alter their situation to better that tax outcome. GST is paid to the Australian Taxation Office by the business for the government to use, further contributing to the economy, and GST cannot be altered by the taxpayers, so they will constantly be paying the same rate of 10% regardless. The next principle of good tax is simplicity. This is where taxes must be clear and transparent with the payers, and consumers must understand the tax from this. Looking at GST, all taxpayers are aware that prices of supplies have an included GST cost within the total amount. This is all included on receipts from establishments selling goods or services, which further inform the consumer of what they are paying for. Moving on, there is certainty. This is where taxpayers must be aware of the tax obligation that they have. Looking at GST, consumers are fully aware of GST costs, as it is included in most of the goods and services prices. This is mainly due to the transparency of the system. As mentioned earlier, entities are also fully aware of their obligations regarding GST to include the pricing and to pay the ATO, as there are rules and regulations that ensure this when an entity begins their business. And finally, we have neutrality, which is where taxes must be upheld to not impact taxpayers' choices by distorting or altering the cost of the alternative goods. In GST, all entities are required to include the 10% GST costs, regardless of the type of good or service or type of registered entity. GST is a neutral tax that remains at a fixed rate to all parties involved, regardless of extenuating circumstances. According to the analysis, GST can be considered a good tax, as it does satisfy 4 out of the 5 principles. It is a relatively beneficial and well-structured tax system in the current economy, and it does provide for any uncertainty and remains at its set rate for all goods and services. Can the GST system be improved? I believe it can, with slight adjustments to the payment method. Specifically, the 10% GST payment should be distributed between the business and the consumer. This will become a slightly fairer outcome to the consumers, as businesses are typically in a higher tax bracket than individuals and can share the cost of the sale. To conclude, GST is an indirect umbrella tax that is applied to most goods and services. It is a set 10% rate, well known to consumers due to the transparency around this tax, and it satisfies the majority of the principles to be considered a good tax. Thank you all for listening. I hope this has clarified my thoughts on GST and good tax and has not been too taxing on you to listen to.